Lord Carnarvon did not die from a mosquito bite. At the exact moment his heart stopped in a Cairo hospital, every light in the city flickered and died without explanation. Thousands of miles away, his dog howled and dropped dead. This was not a medical anomaly. It was the activation of a seal that had remained unbroken for 3,000 years. Within months of breaking into the boy king's tomb, the man who funded the expedition was gone, and he was only the first. This was not the start of a scientific triumph, but the beginning of a pattern of misfortune that would claim over 20 lives, leaving the world to wonder if some secrets are guarded by something far more potent than stone and sand. For over 33 centuries, the Valley of the Kings held its breath, concealing a secret that was never meant to be whispered. When Howard Carter finally peered through a small hole in the sealed doorway in 1922, he described seeing wonderful things. Yet beneath the shimmering gold and the lapis lazuli lay the remains of a 19-year-old boy whose life was as fragile as the glass-like ornaments surrounding him. Tutankhamun was not the mighty conqueror depicted on his chariot. He was a king of shadows, a child born into a fractured world, carrying the weight of a bloodline that was collapsing under its own complexity. He was the final, flickering candle of a dynasty that had been pushed to the absolute brink of sanity. The story of the boy king begins long before his own birth, in the radical and turbulent reign of his father, Akhenaten. The Heretic King had dismantled centuries of tradition, casting aside the old gods to worship a single sun disk, the Aten. This move didn't just change religion, it shattered the social fabric of Egypt, creating powerful enemies within the priesthood, the military, and the common people. When Tutankhamun ascended to the throne at the age of 9, he wasn't a ruler so much as a piece on a high-stakes chessboard. He was a child tasked with cleaning up the wreckage of a revolution he didn't start. He was surrounded by advisors who whispered in his ear, men like the Vizier Ay and the general Horemheb, men who had everything to gain from a king who could be easily manipulated or perhaps easily replaced. As the young king grew, so did the tension within the palace walls. History often paints the Egyptian court as a place of divine order, but the reality for Tutankhamun was likely a labyrinth of paranoia. He was a king who could barely walk without the aid of a cane, his body weakened by a host of genetic complications that were the direct result of generations of royal inbreeding. Recent scans of his remains reveal a teenager who suffered from a club foot and a debilitating bone disease, making him an unlikely leader for an empire that demanded strength and vigor. This physical vulnerability made him a walking target. He was a temporary figurehead in a government waiting for the right moment to pivot back to the old ways, and he knew it. Every step he took in the palace of Memphis or Thebes was likely shadowed by the realization that his protectors were also his potential executioners. The mystery of his end is written in the very bones that survived the millennia. For decades, a small fracture at the base of his skull led many to believe he was struck from behind in a silent, shadowed corridor of the palace. While modern analysis suggests this specific damage might have occurred during the mummification process, it does not erase the suspicious circumstances of his passing. A broken leg, suffered shortly before his death, shows no signs of healing, suggesting a sudden and violent event. Perhaps a fall from a chariot, or perhaps something more orchestrated. In a world where medicine was intertwined with magic and poisons were a refined art, a simple accident was the perfect cover for a calculated removal. If the king was becoming too independent, or if he threatened the plans of his advisors, his fragility made him easy to break. The haste with which Tutankhamun was buried is perhaps the most glaring piece of evidence that something was deeply wrong. His tomb is remarkably small for a pharaoh, more suited for a noble or a high-ranking official than the king of Upper and Lower Egypt. It appears as though the boy king was squeezed into a space that wasn't his, a hurried interment that suggests the court was eager to move on, to bury the last of Akhenaten's line and erase the memory of his family forever. The walls of the burial chamber were painted so quickly that the plaster was still wet when the tomb was sealed, leading to the growth of brown spots of mold that still pepper the scenes of the afterlife today. They didn't even wait for the paint to dry before they locked him away in the dark. It wasn't a funeral, it was a disposal, but the silence of the tomb was not destined to last. When the seal was broken in the 20th century, it was as if a dormant energy was released. The curse of the pharaohs became a global obsession, fueled by a series of high-profile deaths that defied easy explanation. Following Lord Carnarvon's mysterious demise, his half-brother died of blood poisoning. A wealthy American financier who visited the tomb died of pneumonia shortly after. A radiologist who X-rayed the mummy died of an unknown illness. Even the Egyptian director of antiquities, who laughed at the curse, died suddenly after supervised the transport of Tutankhamun's artifacts. While skeptics point to ancient bacteria or fungal spores trapped in the stagnant air, others noted that the deaths seemed to follow a logic that science couldn't quite map, a sequence of misfortune that targeted those who had most intimately disturbed the boy king's rest. The political aftermath of Tutankhamun's death is where the thriller truly deepens. With no heir to the throne, his young widow, Ankhesenamun, found herself in a desperate position. She was the last royal link to the 18th dynasty, and she was surrounded by men who wanted to marry her only to secure their own claim to the throne. In a move unprecedented in Egyptian history, she wrote a letter to the king of the Hittites, Egypt's bitter enemies, begging him to send one of his sons to marry her and become king. She wrote that she was afraid that she would not take one of her servants as a husband. This was a direct cry for help from a woman trapped in a den of vipers. The Hittite prince was sent, but he never reached the border. He was intercepted and ended in a way that remains a mystery to this day, leaving the path clear for the elderly Vizier Ay to seize the throne and marry the widowed queen against her will. Soon after, Ankhesenamun herself vanished from the historical record. No tomb has ever been found for her. No mention of her fate exists in the chronicles of the kings who followed. It was as if the entire royal family was being systematically deleted from time. The man who followed Ay, the general Horemheb, went even further. He didn't just take the throne, he attempted to rewrite history itself. He chiseled Tutankhamun's name off monuments and claiming the boy king's accomplishments as his own. He struck the names of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and Tutankhamun from the official lists of kings. The golden boy was intended to be a ghost, a name lost to the shifting sands of the desert, his very existence a footnote that the new regime wanted to burn. Yet there is a certain irony in the way the golden curse preserved him. By being buried in a small, tucked-away tomb and having his name struck from the official lists, Tutankhamun was hidden from the very people who should have found him. Tomb robbers who stripped the larger, grander monuments of his ancestors simply didn't know he existed, while the great kings who tried to erase him were reduced to dust and empty stone by thieves. Tutankhamun remained untouched, wrapped in his gold and his silence. The very act of his erasure was what eventually made him the most famous man to ever emerge from the ancient world. The men who tried to kill his memory ended up immortalizing it. The question remains, was the curse a biological defense mechanism or something more profound? Ancient Egyptians were masters of the mind, and the inscriptions found in various tombs often warned that death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king. Is it possible that the architects of the tomb used more than just locks and stones? Some suggest the placement of certain minerals or the use of psychological triggers was designed to ensure that anyone who entered with ill intent would find themselves plagued by a sense of dread that could manifest as physical illness. We know that certain molds like Aspergillus flavus can survive for millennia in sealed environments, producing toxins that attack the lungs of those with weakened immune systems. But does biology explain the lights going out in Cairo? Does it explain the sudden death of a dog halfway across the world? When we look at the golden mask of Tutankhamun, we see a face of serene, eternal youth. But if we look closer, we see the face of a boy who was likely very lonely, a king who presided over a crumbling legacy while his own body failed him. The dark thriller of his life wasn't just in how he died, but in how he was used while he lived. He was a child king in a den of lions, a placeholder for ambitious men who waited in the shadows for the moment his breath would cease. He was surrounded by gold, but he was a prisoner of his own bloodline. The wealth of his tomb wasn't a tribute to his greatness. It was a bribe to the gods to keep him in the underworld, so he would never return to challenge those who stole his throne. Even today, the tomb refuses to give up all its secrets. Ground-penetrating radar has suggested the existence of hidden chambers behind the painted walls of the burial room. Some archaeologists believe that Queen Nefertiti herself might lie just inches away, separated by a thin veil of plaster and 3,000 years of silence. If there are more chambers, what else might be waiting? If the opening of a single small room triggered a wave of tragedy and global fascination, what would the discovery of a lost queen do to our understanding of this dark dynasty? The air in that tomb is still heavy, and the researchers who enter today do so with masks and sensors, fully aware that the boy king's wonderful things come with a price. The story of Tutankhamun is a reminder that the past is never truly dead. It is merely waiting. The boy king was buried in a hurry, shrouded in gold to mask the fractures in his bones and his kingdom. He was forgotten by history until he decided he was ready to be found. The curse may be a myth, a coincidence, or a toxic reaction to ancient molds, but the sense of unease that surrounds his name persists. He remains the boy who died in the dark, only to become the brightest light in the history of archaeology. A light that seems to burn those who get too close. The more we probe his life, the more we realize that the real thriller isn't a supernatural curse, but the cold, calculating nature of human ambition that pursued him even into the grave. As we continue to study the 18th dynasty, we must ask ourselves if we are looking for the truth, or if we are merely the latest participants in a drama that was scripted long ago. Every time a new study is published or a new theory is proposed, the whispers in the valley grow a little louder. Tutankhamun's life was a tragedy of palace intrigue and physical suffering, but his afterlife has been a masterclass in staying power. He has outlived his enemies, his usurpers, and those who tried to erase him from the stars. He has become a mirror in which we see our own obsession with death, wealth, and the unknown. The gold does not just shine, it warns. It tells a story of a boy who was never meant to be king, a king who was never meant to be remembered, and a memory that refuses to fade. In the silence of the Valley of the Kings, the shadows still move, and the air still carries the weight of 1,000 years of guarded secrets. Whether it is a curse of the spirit or a curse of the mind, the legacy of the boy king remains a labyrinth with no clear exit, inviting us to enter but never promising that we will leave unchanged. The boy who was hidden from the world has become the one the world cannot stop looking at. In the end, perhaps the most shocking truth is not how he died, but how he continues to live among us. He is a constant presence in our museums, our films, and our nightmares. He is the king of the dead who rules the living's imagination. And as long as his tomb remains a source of wonder and fear, the boy who was buried in a hurry will continue to have the final word, his silent golden gaze watching us from across the chasm of time, waiting for the next person brave enough or foolish enough to break the seal. We are told that dead men tell no tales, but Tutankhamun has been screaming his story for 100 years, and we are only just beginning to hear the truth behind the gold.